Welcome back, welcome back. On the eve of the Iraq War, a speech to the men of the Royal Irish Regiment inspired the coalition forces. "We go to liberate, not to conquer," it said. "Let's bring everyone home and leave Iraq a better place for us having been there." So stirring was the speech that President Bush apparently pinned it on his wall. 5 years on and little sign of that better, safer Iraq yet. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have died, and last month General Petraeus announced that Iraqi security forces are not ready yet to defend Iraq. I'm joined now by the man who 5 years ago predicted that better future for Iraq and who inspired his men with that speech, Colonel Tim Collins. Welcome, Tim. You also in the speech you underlined what historic land Iraq really is, the site of the Garden of Eden, of the Great Flood and the birthplace of Abraham.
Indeed, yes, and the place where the first writing was formalized. So yes, that's truly a historic place.
And in terms of what you were saying there in the speech and so on, do you think that in fact the other elements of the coalition besides yourself also came not to conquer?
I think that it could be, one could harshly judge, there's great speculation to say that the war was about oil. I genuinely believe that the administration, George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, truly believed that there would be a outbreak of joy. They would be greeted as liberators like the liberation of France in the 1940s, and that Iraq would find its own way. What they failed to understand, though, which the British should have understood was they created the nation of Iraq, is that when you create a vacuum, you must have something to put into that vacuum, or you live with the consequences. Nature abhors a vacuum, so do politics. That's what they'd failed to understand.
And there were people who said, I mean, Prince Andrew we were talking to earlier on, I know in fact that he said this thing about, you know, that Americans didn't listen about the events after the war. And I mean, the thing is, people were saying, Colin Powell was saying that we needed more men, more arrangements after the war. So the advice was around, wasn't it?
Well, I think there's two aspects to this. First of all, the Americans were listening to, the coalition was listening to people, but perhaps the wrong people. They were listening and hearing what they wanted to hear, as opposed to because the advice was there. And certainly my time in Iraq, and since then, one has to rely heavily on the advice of the Iraqis, and there's some sound advisors. So often what they tell you is not what you want to hear, but you've got to listen to them. The other thing I think that we must understand is the extent to which the collapse of order in Iraq was pre-planned by Saddam's regime. Tariq Aziz, before the fall of Iraq, in a press conference said, "People say we're not Vietnam. Where are your jungles? Where are your swamps?" He said, "Let our people be our forests. Let our cities be our swamps." Now we understand what he meant. This was designed to fail. The Fedayeen had a plan to create an insurgency, and they succeeded.
Absolutely, they succeeded. And you've just recently been back to Iraq. What's your camera shot of it now?
Well, I've visited Iraq every year since the invasion, and I must say that I'm more optimistic this year during my visit than I've been before. What I would say is that people talk about, has the surge worked, has the surge not worked? The surge has done exactly what it says in the tin. It has achieved a stopgap. And the plan always was that into that stopgap, the Iraqi government would step and have a chance to breathe and expand. It seems that their progress is not as advanced as we had hoped. And so I think that the coalition, and let's face it, it's actually the United States by and large, needs to stand by the Iraqi government as a friend and ally for a little longer than perhaps we had hoped.
And that should be Britain as well as America.
Nobody really knows what the British are for in Iraq. We don't know what they do. They stay in their base. A great deal of nonsense was talked when they withdraw from Basra about going into Overwatch. But then, of course, when the Iraqi army took on the Sadrist militias, and whether that's a good idea or a bad idea is a second, but when they needed help, the British stayed in their base. There's troops who go and do their entire tour of duty in Iraq, and they stay in the base. So I think what's lacking in the British presence, Freudian slip, in Iraq is a bit like what's lacking with the whole of the British government at the moment. There is no plan. Nobody knows what to do.
And so that means things will stagger on, will stumble on in Iraq.
Well, I think that what will happen is that as other areas of as the Iraqis become more stable, one of the remarkable things about Anbar province is the tribal awakening there has become very firm. Indeed, I would say that Al-Qaeda has been virtually driven out of Anbar, the largest of the Sunni provinces, by local people. That there is a bitter fight going on in Diyala province as we speak, with tribal risings there to drive out Al-Qaeda. So I think that incrementally the Iraqi people are taking control. I think that the Iraqi government and the international community need to engage Muqtada al-Sadr in dialogue, because I personally think that as well as the leader of the Shia and the representation of the downtrodden Shia masses, he's also an Iraqi patriot and someone we need to talk to.
And so if the two extremes that get discussed in this American election, for instance, I mean, on the one hand, more troops for longer, and on the other, withdrawal as fast as possible. Would you go for either of those? You'd go for the first, would you?
Well, I think that, I don't think there's a need for more troops, but I think that the troops that are there need to stay for slightly longer. I think incremental reduction is going to take slightly longer than we'd all hoped for, and no one wants to see the US troops coming home more than I do, but they know they're there to do a job, and they're doing a good job, but I fear that they're going to be there slightly longer than we'd all hoped for. In terms of cut and run, I think that one can look at parallels with Vietnam. People forget and often misquote that talk about Americans being defeated militarily in Vietnam. They were not. They were defeated politically after their premature withdrawal. So I think the only way in which, because it is a long-term problem, Iraq is important to the region, and I think that it is possible to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, and the way to do that is to cut and run.
So you wouldn't cut and run, and at the same time, how many marks out of 10 would you give the current Iraqi government?
They're a bit of a curate's egg. I think that they are not proactive enough in my view, and when they do act, it's out of necessity. I'd like to see more planning, but I think that the next round of elections will actually give us a better form of governance and more confidence. I believe Dr. Maliki's government will be returned, but I think we'll have a broader coalition, because of course in 2005 in the elections, the vast majority of Sunnis didn't vote. And the party which took power on behalf of the Sunnis, the Iraqi Islamic Party, hasn't had the full backing of the whole Sunni people. I think the appearance of the Awakening Party, the SAI, I think will be a significant player in the next election. I think we'll see more of a balance in Iraqi politics. And I think that in turn will both strengthen and embolden Dr. Maliki.
And in terms of the actions of the soldiers and so on, there have been a number of tragic own goals in terms of the abuse by the coalition and so on, and all those things that are well known about Abu Shraib and so on and so forth. This week the focus turned to the UK with a public inquiry announced over the death of Baha Musa, who was beaten a great many times in the custody of the British forces. That has been a terrible own goal throughout this war, hasn't it?
Without a doubt. But the point about it was, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, is that the Royal Military Police is not fitted for investigating murder. It's a traffic control organisation, and the mistake was made early on by tasking these people to investigate a serious murder. We have one of the finest police forces across the UK, and with the Metropolitan Police or Police Service, wherever. We should have had civil policemen investigating this. Now what's happening is this ridiculous government, addicted to saying sorry, as if that helps, has now ordered another public inquiry. It will go down the same road as the Bloody Sunday inquiry, £900 million, which if you poured into the centre of Londonderry to make it a better place would have been better spent. But it was squandered and went into solicitors' pockets.
Not £900 million, was it?
It's a huge...
It's a big figure, yeah. But I think you've got an extra naught in there or something. But anyway, one last question. What are you going to do next? They say, the word on the Rialto is that he might be going into politics.
Absolutely not.
Really?
No interest whatsoever, because I must say that one looks at the politics in the United Kingdom at the moment, it's Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and most uninspiring.
No. Oh well, but you've always been inspiring, so you could get in there and get amongst them. Anyway, Tim, thank you for being with us today. Looking back over the last 5 years of Iraq. That's it for this week. Join me again in another 7 days for another unmissable Frost Over the World. See you then.